Welcome back. I'm your host, Renata McKelvany. I am a creativity coach for neurodivergent and multi passionate women of color. And in this show, we talk about all things creativity as it relates to our self discovery and healing journey. Today, we are going to be talking about why you need to create even if you don't feel like it, especially if you don't feel like it. Because here's the thing, waiting to feel good before you can engage with your creativity is not such a great idea. So let's talk about why this is. Let me share with you some of my personal experiences and some ideas of what we can do instead. If this sounds interesting to you, please stick around, keep listening, keep watching if you're on YouTube, and let's get into it. I want to start off close to home and name the elephant in the room. That is the political climate that we are living under, especially in the US. If you have been watching the news, you know what it's like. If you have been paying attention, you know how people are feeling. There's a lot of stress, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of hopelessness, and disempowerment going around. And it's easy to feel that we have to wait until we feel good before we can pick up our creative tools. This is the first myth that so many of us fall for. This myth of feeling like we have to be inspired before we create. I create every day. I work as a graphic designer by day. I create this podcast. I write. I do a bunch of things. And a lot of that work is very outwardly focused, meaning that people are going to look over my work, or I'm looking for feedback, or I'm doing it to promote my work and things like that. So that kind of creativity is really focused on an outcome, a result. My point is, even somebody like me who works as a professional creative, who is constantly creating things, is aware that there's a distinction between the work that I do for others and the work that I do for me. And it's easy to create for everyone else and forget that really the whole point of why I do this is for me. I create to feel good about my life, about what I'm doing every single day. But most importantly, I do it because it makes me feel good. And it's important to make space for creativity that is open ended, to express myself freely, where I don't have to worry about doing things right or wrong. And that is something that I think a lot of us forget because we have been conditioned to think that creativity is this thing that you do when you feel great, when you feel inspired, when you have amazing ideas. I saw this post on Instagram and it really stuck with me. They talked about the idea that when we create only when we feel good, we're really just creating decoration. You can make the thing and do it from a place of being in your head, very intellectual, very mechanical, where you're not really putting your heart into it. You're not really being vulnerable. And you're doing the thing and it's getting done. But part of what's missing, it's that special ingredient. And I think that special ingredient is your vulnerability, is your humanity. This is something we have to remember. Creating can be a thing that we do because we want to get it done, like a chore and other things that we have to do on our to do list, or we can approach it from a more heart centered way, from a place of nurturing ourselves. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in the next couple of points. But I did want to say that it's really easy to view our creativity as something that we go to only when we feel great. But that is really not helpful. Another thing that's really common amongst people who want to create more but hold themselves back when they're not feeling great is that they're putting way too much pressure on themselves. And I'm going to do another episode of this point alone because it's such a huge problem. And it's something that even I have just started to unpack for myself because it's so subtle, it's so insidious, but it really does have a really negative effect on our output and on our ability to express ourselves. So look out for that. But my point here is that so many of us have this super high expectations of what we can achieve in 30 minutes, in 15 minutes, which is probably what's most realistic for a lot of us on the daily basis when we have a lot going on and we have so many responsibilities to take care of. I know this was me for a long time. I used to struggle so much with creative block. And I know this might be shocking to some of you, but this is why I'm so passionate about this work, because I've been there myself so many times. And I felt like a big part of the problem was that I had really big expectations about what I could do. I wanted to be able to sit down and create something amazing and complete it in one sitting. I hated leaving things for another day because I never went back to it. If I didn't finish it in that moment, I would not go back to it. And I'm still working through that today, where I am now letting myself work a little bit slower, take breaks. If anything, I realized that if I don't finish something in one sitting, the next day I could just pick up right where I left off, and I don't have to reinvent the wheel and think about what I'm going to create. I could just sit down and continue working. And actually, that makes things so much easier. So, there's a tip there for you. Here's one last thing that I want to say regarding this point, which is that a lot of us are waiting to think about what we want to do before we sit down to create. And this is another huge pitfall because let me tell you the secret here. The secret sauce that a lot of people might not be sharing with you or might not be saying, but the answers are found in the process of making something. It's found when you sit down and you get to work. The answers are not going to come to you by thinking about things, thinking, and not making any tangible steps forward. You have to sit down and actually do the work. And as you do things, you start getting ideas and as you start letting yourself play, you're like, oh, but what if I do it this way or that way? Your brain starts to go there, starts to allow you to think about more creative possibilities. But so many of us really believe that we have to know all of that before we start. And so that's a big no. That's a big newbie mistake. Do not wait to feel good. Use your creativity, your creative practice to figure out the answers that you are looking for. And that's what's magical about the creative process, that you discover so much as you work. But you must give yourself the chance to do this. Don't stop yourself before you start. That's the lesson here. The next thing that I want to talk about when it comes to how we hold ourselves back from creating, especially when we don't feel great, is how we think that we have to earn our right to create. For me, this was such a huge problem. It can still be a problem if I'm not mindful, but it showed up in not wanting to waste time. I didn't want to sit down and spend 2 to 3 hours creating something that I felt wasn't good enough, or like I was being frivolous and self indulgent because I was doing this thing that was leading to nothing. That's at least how I thought about it. I thought that I had to create and prove myself and prove that it was worth spending the time, because I was so used to living in productivity mode and hustling mode, and everything that I did in my life had to be a means to an end. I grew up in an immigrant family. I'm an immigrant myself, so the story that I heard growing up was you have to work hard, you have to aspire to the highest levels of excellence because this is your chance. We came to this country to give you the best and you have to make the most out of it. I never felt like I could relax. This is another huge topic that we have to get into in a future episode. This feeling of people expecting a lot of you because you did good in school when you were a kid, or because you show promise when it came to creativity, and people wanted you to do a lot very early on. For those of us that are sensitive and intuitive and who feel deeply, this can be a lot. It can be a feeling of pressure that follows us into adulthood, and it makes us feel like we can never make a mistake, that we are not allowed to be human and less than perfect. That is also the beginning of perfectionism and having high standards. It ends up becoming this coping mechanism to get people off our back, a coping mechanism that we develop to deal with the fact that people might be disappointed with us, that we might not be able to do what they expect. And we rather hold ourselves back and sabotage ourselves and our efforts, because that's easier to deal with than to have to face the wrath that comes from other people being mad at us. And this is what it feels like for me and so many sensitive people out there. Our emotions feel intense and it feels like it's never going to stop. So we continue doing the same things and go into the same coping mechanisms because that's the only thing that we know and it helps us to feel better, which is why we do it. But really, we need to stop looking at creativity as a nice to have and more as a necessity. If you have been able to resonate with any of the things that I have been talking about, I want to let you know that everything that we've been chatting about, it's really normal, it's really common across the board as highly sensitive people, as intuitives, as neurodivergents and multi-passionate. There's so much that's going on in our minds, in our hearts. We're trying to manage so much that I really want to encourage you to give yourself a break, to give yourself gentle, kind self-talk, because we can be our worst enemies. And we tend to internalize the problems and we think that everything that we do must be our fault. So, what can we do instead? What I want to propose is that we focus on building a creative habit that helps us to not only nourish ourselves, but support our well being. A creative habit that isn't based on outcomes or pushing ourselves, but instead a habit that is supportive, that becomes a practice like any other practice. Think your morning rituals like body stretches or drinking water, a practice to help us live better, feel better, and help us navigate life with more energy and clarity. Creativity not as a nice to have, but as a vital necessity. If you take anything away from today's show, is this: you need to create, especially when you don't feel good. Feeling better is the whole point of creating. So please don't stop. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe and hit like if you're watching on YouTube. Also, sign up for my newsletter. I send weekly emails and I'm really excited because I'm getting ready to talk about my brand new offerings, which are going to help you to learn about yourself, discover what's most important to you, reconnect with play, and help you build a creative habit, which is what I've been talking about today. And I can't wait to tell you all the details of that program. So if this is something that you want to learn more about, you want to hear about, sign up for my newsletter. The link is in the show's description. And that's also the best way for us to stay connected. Thank you for tuning in, and I will talk to you on the next one. Until then, stay creative. Bye.